All right, perfect. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar. I'm Kayli, the editor of LPM. I'm joined by Bernard Savage from 10½. He will give us some tips and tools for business development. Before we start, I want to say a big thank you to our partner Quiss for supporting this webinar. And a bit of housekeeping. Can everyone make sure that they are on gallery view and not speaker view? You'll find that on the top right corner. Can you everyone please make sure you're muted as well? We'll open up at the end for a bit of questions and discussion. So do feel free to engage and make the most of Bernard's expertise and time this morning. The slides will also be made available at the end as well as a full recording. So without further ado, Bernard, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you very much, Kayli. Good morning to all of you wherever you are in the UK. For what it's worth, I'm in, so I say sunny Nottingham. It's not sunny at all, quite miserable, but there we go. I think it's fair to say that the last, 11, 12 weeks or so, people's lives have been turned upside down. And I don't think there's ever been a point, certainly in my career or lifetime, and I suspect it's the same for you, where something has happened that has really touched everybody, either personally, professionally, or indeed both. And clearly that does present some challenges, but life goes on, business goes on, and arguably business development is going to be more important for all of us in the months and year ahead, as certainly in some parts of the business, some markets are going to contract. It's going to be tougher. So we need to ensure that the opportunities that are out there, they're coming your way. The other thing I want to say before I dive in is that irrespective of what the government have to announce and the continual easing of the lockdown, we're not going to go back to things exactly as they were before. And so a lot of the practices and ideas that I'm going to share with you have long-term relevance. This is not just applicable to lockdown. These techniques, these approaches that I'm going to share are going to be relevant long after the end of the lockdown. In any difficult situation, panic's never been a great strategy to get us out of a hole, whether that be personal or professional, and this is no different. And it's important to recognise that there is more to business development than going to events. As important as events are, there are many different aspects to BD, and what I want to do is highlight the areas that I believe should be your priority today. So what are these areas? I'm going to focus on 3 specific areas this morning. Firstly, the need to adopt a more professional and rigorous approach to staying in contact with people that we know already, those are existing clients and referrers, through telephone and the video conferencing platforms. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the need to create more content and leverage that content, less about existing contacts and more with a view to getting visible to prospective new clients. And thirdly, I want to share with you some thoughts on LinkedIn, because I think now is the time to really take LinkedIn more seriously than perhaps you have done before. Now, a combination of factors: 1, that you're muted; 2, that I don't know a number of you. I certainly know some people that have dialed in this morning, but there's many of you I don't know. And thirdly, that you're just far too polite. What you're not going to say, but some of you will be thinking at the moment is, why have I dialed in this morning for Bernard to talk to me about the telephone? Doesn't sound particularly innovative to me. It's been around a long time. So where am I coming from? Let me be very clear. This isn't about picking up your little black book and working your way through all of your contacts and saying, hello, Sarah here, it's just a courtesy call, or John here, just phoning to catch up. The people that you're trying to influence, be them clients, referrers, prospects, these people are busy. They've got a lot going on, not just professionally speaking, but you're likely to find them in periods of stress. They're working from home. They may well have young children under their feet. They might be caring for elderly parents. They might not be working in the easiest of circumstances. Now, for all of these reasons, you need to be quite considered and quite targeted in who you approach and how you engage with them. So what does it look like? Well, what I'm talking about here is a professional, focused and structured approach to connecting with people. So let me talk you through the process. First part of the process is really to do some desk research. And this is about understanding exactly where your business is coming from. take a snapshot, perhaps look at your case histories over, say, 2 years, and identify the 10 or maybe 12 individuals that have generated the opportunities for you. Where exactly is your business coming from? Now, Pareto's rule, the 80-20 law, says that 80% of outputs come from 20% of inputs. What does that mean in English? What's it got to do with BD, and what's it got to do with you and using telephone? Well, what it means is that a relatively small number of individuals are generating those fees. You need to identify those individuals. And then importantly, this is about you making a concerted effort to invest in those relationships in the months ahead. Now, let me just dwell on that for a couple of minutes. Winning business isn't about phoning people up, giving them some chat, frankly, and getting an instruction. Business development done properly is a process, it takes time, and it's got to be a two-way thing. This involves you creating goodwill. Now, again, let me be very transparent. I don't make a habit of doing things for free, I can assure you. At this point in time, I've invested more in generating goodwill with existing contacts primarily, because now is the time to create that goodwill. Hopefully people have long memories and then the instructions will follow in the future. But it has to be two-way. The second part of it isn't about a one-off activity. It's about a number of touch points over a period of months. I've even got some connections today that have taken me years and I still haven't seen the money. But as anyone who has worked with me will know, I don't make a habit of giving up. So what next? You've got your list. How do you approach them? Planning. There's two parts to the planning. The first part is for you to be very clear in your mind exactly what does success look like. Now, that's not as obvious as it sounds. Success isn't often or isn't always about instructions or referrals. It can take many forms. Now, if we relate that to this exchange this morning, I use a model. It's called the ODE model. It's something I picked up many, many years ago when I worked in-house at Shell. And when I plan what I want from this particular contact, the O, the optimum output, it's not an instruction. The optimum output for me would be that it would generate some positivity afterwards and that perhaps there's some leads which start some conversations. That would be fantastic. The D is the desired. That's the level just below that. And that might be, in this particular instance, some positive feedback which goes to LPM, and the result of that is perhaps an invitation to talk at a future event. Hopefully in real time. I much prefer being in front of audiences rather than staring at a computer screen. What's the E? The E is the essential, and there's always a risk, isn't there? And this situation this morning is no different. The E for me is that I don't do anything to damage my reputation and that of my business, size 10.5 boots. There are quite a significant number of law firms dialing in this morning. And the worst thing that I could do is shoot myself in the foot. So fingers crossed that won't happen. And what next? What about the structure of the conversation itself? For me personally, again, a little bit of personal disclosure, this is where I draw upon experience, but more specifically, some mistakes I've made, hopefully earlier in my career rather than in more recent years. And when I look back to those early days, which for me was at Procter & Gamble, and I wince at times and I think about situations where quite possibly I was too eager to sell, a little bit too hungry, and it was all me, this is what I want to present to you. That's not the best way to sell in a B2B environment. Best possible way that you can promote your business is by being visible, getting in front of people and creating an environment where the person you're talking to feels sufficiently comfortable that he or she is going to open up to you. I now see it as success if the person that I'm in a conversation with talks for 70% of that contact. Sometimes quite difficult doing that because you want to get across your particular point or your story. But I've learned over the years to bite my lip. Why? First thing is, if people are talking for that amount of time, that means they like you. That means you've established a comfortable environment. You've got rapport. They're opening up to you. You're building trust. That's essential in a B2B environment. Second thing is, assuming you're listening, of course, is that you're learning. And all the time you're learning, that enables you to do two things. One, frame, when you do get an opportunity to speak in that context, to frame what you have to say in a way that actually is more likely to be met positively. And secondly, and this is the most important thing, I think, and again, without being disingenuous to the legal profession, this is the area that I think there's most opportunity to improve. Get the follow-up better. Law firms I work with, and I've worked with more than 100, this is the area that I think is done typically quite poorly by many, even experienced fee earners. So what does good follow-up look like? Going back to a point I made earlier on, that BD is a process. For me, follow-up is about small steps that nudge the conversation forward. It's about agreement to a next meeting, agreement to meet somebody else. It's about delivering on promises and delivering on promises quickly. So I'll give you an example that relates to this conversation this morning. I'm going to make a commitment to everyone listening this morning that by close of business today, I will share with LPM and them, they will distribute the material, but there's 3 supplementary reports that go into a level of detail that I can't possibly do in 30 minutes, unless I talk very, very, very quickly. I'm talking quickly already, so I'm not going to do that. Now, a number of things can happen here. I could forget to send those reports, in which case I really have shot myself in the foot, because you'll question anything, the value of anything that I've said this morning. Or let's paint the worst case, a better but a not brilliant scenario. I send the reports, you receive them and think, well, these reports don't add a lot of value. That would be disappointing, but actually, even in that scenario, I still demonstrated that I do what I say I'm going to do. Just to reassure you, they're good reports, you're going to like them and they do add value, but you will be the judges of that. But more than anything is doing what you say you're going to do, doing it quickly, keeping the conversation alive. So what about content, the second area? Now, all of your firms, I'm absolutely certain, I know, produce content. What do I mean by content? You have websites, you have newsletters, you have publications. You don't just have written content. Some of you have video content. You might have webinars. You might be producing podcasts. You'll be creating content in some shape or form. There's a number of buts, or let's put it differently, opportunities to create more value, win more business by being more savvy in how you go about using content. So let me explain what I mean. First thing to say is, of course, any content you create, however good it is, however much value it adds, it only really has an effect if the people who you're seeking to influence actually come across that content. And here lies the problem. Because unfortunately, let's take a situation where you get something published in an external publication. So let's imagine you're in the property and construction sector, for the sake of argument, and that you succeed in getting an article published in, I don't know, Estates Gazette, Building Magazine, Construction News, Property Week, whatever. Well, that would be brilliant. But you know in your organisation, how many people really read all the publications that you subscribe to? And even if they do they read them cover to cover? And even if they do read them cover to cover, does it stick with them that page 47, written by you, an excellent article about some landlord and tenant issues, that it's written by you, and does it, if imagine you're a litigator, does it actually hit them at the point when they're dealing with a litigious matter? Quite possibly not. So what does all this mean? It doesn't mean that there isn't considerable value and merit in getting articles published. That's not what I'm saying. What it does mean is that it's incumbent upon all fee earners in your firm to take personal responsibility and take the initiative, be proactive to push stuff out there using hyperlinks, PDFs, JPEGs. Frankly, old school, get printed copies and stick it in the post and put a postage stamp on it. But this is really important. And too often what happens is the marketing is left to your either your in-house department or perhaps external suppliers that you work with. Well, that's great, but you can't be totally reliant on them. You've got to take personal responsibility. They're your relationships. What else? Second point is that where I think some opportunities are missed is what I call it squeezing the lemon or recycling. It's where you've invested a lot of time, effort, and energy in producing quality content, whether that's written or spoken, but then it's left. It's like, well, I've done that, and you move on to the next thing. Whereas if you've created, I would argue, if you've created written content, you should be thinking, right, okay, could we turn this into a webinar? Could we splice this article and turn it into frequently asked questions or a listicle? Could we turn this into a theme for a podcast? etc., etc., etc. There are so many options and people don't squeeze the lemon enough. The next area I want to highlight with regards to content is let's park your firm for a minute and let's consider your professional, your business partners. So for a law firm, that might be an accountant, could be a banker, could be a financial advisor, a estate agent, healthcare professional. You know, there are many, many, many possibilities. But what they all have in common is they all produce their own content. Now let's just think about that a minute and think how that might help you. In those organizations, they will have, again, in-house or external marketing resource, and they've got two big issues. Issue number one, they've got to come up with fresh content, new ideas. That's not easy. Issue number two, having come up with the fresh content and new ideas, they've then got to influence their target market. Well, that's not easy either. I'll give you an example. Imagine a scenario, and I'm sure you can relate to this, where you receive a newsletter, say from the bank. Banks produce a lot of stuff, or perhaps an accountancy firm. Even if only subconsciously, when you read that newsletter, you're thinking, well, you know, they would say that, wouldn't they? They're trying to sell me something. And of course they are. How much more powerful would it be for the bank or the accountant or whatever other business partner you can consider who had the article written by you, a solicitor? Significantly more powerful. So what I'm suggesting here is that in the course of your telephone conversations, your video conference conversations, the way you communicate with your professional network, rather than just focus on you, your position, what you have, and trying to get people to go to your webinars and subscribe to your publications, ask questions around what marketing platforms are they using, what different things are they involved with, and create a situation where, frankly, you don't have to ask, because you're putting yourself in the frame to get an invitation to be a guest on their podcast, to collaborate with them on a webinar, to create content with them. This isn't a hard sell. In fact, it's in their interest to ask you to support them. It means less work for them, new ideas, and you've strengthened their own marketing. Why would they not want to collaborate with you? But the reason you're not getting as many opportunities as you might be is because they're not going to think of that. You've got to take the initiative and you've got to get on their radar, and you've got to consider that in conversations, it isn't all about instructions and referrals. Visibility platforms, arguably, in some cases, will be more important because of the multiplier effect and the way that those, if you piggyback bigger brands, effectively, they can propel your brand. They can get you into places that you alone would struggle to be able to achieve. What else? I want to focus on just a couple of minutes on two specific areas of content that I've touched on, but I haven't given much detail, and they're important. One of the interesting observations over this lockdown period is that when I've spent time talking, or more importantly, listening to leaders of professional service firms, particularly marketing professionals, something that many people have said, and nobody has said anything, is that people have said to me, they've been forced into a position that because events have been cancelled, they're doing more webinars than they've ever done before. In some cases, they've never done webinars before, and now they're starting to use platforms like Zoom. And what they're saying to me is this: in the old days, if I can say that, let's take an example of an employment lawyer who goes to the marketing department and says, right, there's a new legislation, because there's always new legislation after all with employment law. There's new legislation. This gives us an opportunity to showcase the firm. Let's do a legal update. So the marketing department say, yeah, okay, good idea. Let's do that. Minimum is going to take 6 weeks to turn that around. 8 weeks is probably more realistic, possibly even as long as 10 weeks. Of course, the problem then is by the time you run the event, it's not such fresh news, is it? Second issue, you've got to find a venue. Third issue, catering. Fourth issue, I could go on and on. The whole project management that's associated with traditional events is fraught with pitfalls. It's not particularly efficient. It's a lot of aggro. I'm not rubbishing the events. I'm just saying there's quite a lot to it. Then you come to the day itself. We're expecting 52 people there. The employment department are really excited because they're going to get HR directors and chief execs and FDs, business owners. You know what I'm going to say next. The day comes, there isn't 52 people, there's 27. And there ain't HR directors, they're HR consultants. Why are they HR consultants? Because they're there to get referrals from you. And you start to look at this and you think, well, we've invested all this money, all this time, all this effort, energy, and actually what have we got in return? Sometimes not very much. Now, when you compare that with webinars, one, they can be turned around in days. Two, you haven't got to consider venues, catering, you haven't got all the associated costs. And arguably more important than any of that, we go back to the employment scenario, you do get the HR directors, or you're more likely to get the HR directors, finance directors, chief execs, business owners. Why? They haven't got to leave the office early to travel somewhere. They just dial in. It's much easier. Now, let me be clear. I've painted a fairly simplistic black and white picture. Of course, it's never as straightforward as that, is it? Webinars are fraught with their own, particularly at the moment where we're getting more comfortable with video conference facilities, and they're not always, there are technical glitches. This happens. And of course, you don't have the intimacy that you get in with face-to-face. But they're not going to go away. Webinars will become a bigger part of organizations' marketing approach looking ahead. So it's really important that we embrace it positively and actually seek to find ways to strengthen our connection with both our existing contacts and meet new people. Second point I want to make in content before we move on is podcasts. So another bit of personal disclosure. I'm not a very techie person. I'm significantly less comfortable when it comes to anything involving technology. That means I'm out of my comfort zone and I find reasons not to do it. A year or so ago, my business partner, Doug McPherson, said, I really think that we should be embarking on a podcast and we should be doing podcasts. I didn't want to do it. I used every excuse under the sun. Silly excuses to do with, oh, it won't work in marketing. I don't really think we'll generate business. What a load of nonsense. The reality was, I just didn't want to do it. I was out of my comfort zone. Doug, as anyone that knows him will also know, he's got a way of getting what he wants. So we ended up going down the podcast route. It's been a really interesting learning experience for me, and it's been a positive one. This is what I've learned. Podcasts are actually very easy. I mean, yes, you need to have someone who's got a modicum of technical ability, but Doug's no engineer. We produce our own podcasts, and I think they're quite good. More importantly, we get some great feedback. Secondly, they're less work. Anyone that's had to produce a slide deck to give a presentation will know if it's done properly, it's a lot of work. Podcasts, significantly less so, because the best podcasts, they're not scripted. There's a framework, and that you agree some questions at the beginning. So they need to have some structure, but it's less work, frankly. It's a professional conversation with a bit of structure around it. And here's the thing, podcasts are really recyclable, because once you've got it recorded, you can then use it as a follow-up mechanism with people that your normal way of business. So they're massively powerful. And when you get them on iTunes and Spotify, which we have, it's called the Size 10.5 Boots Coffee Cast. There's my plug. That's your marketing working for you at no cost, 24/7, 365 days a year. Here's the other reason I mentioned podcasts. Again, let me paint the worst case scenario. You take the view after this webinar, well, yeah, I hear what Bernard says, but it won't work for us. We don't have that kind of technical knowledge in-house. It just sounds, no, it's not really our thing. Even if it isn't your thing, what you've got to recognize is it is the thing of your business partners, and will be increasingly. So even if you don't want to do something in-house, in the course of your conversations with your referrers, your wider professional network, even your clients, get it into conversation, find out what they're doing, and engineer serendipity, i.e. get yourself invited to be a guest on their podcast. And they should want you to be a guest on their podcast for exactly the same reasons I've already explained with regards to written content. Now, we practice what we preach. If you do listen to the Size 10.5 Boots Coffee Cast, what you'll notice is if you took the last 10 episodes, I think I'm only in 3 out of the 10. Why is that? Well, Doug's in 10 out of 10. He enjoys it. We should do things that we enjoy. If you enjoy it, you'll be better at it. He is more comfortable in that position than I am. He's very good. He acts as the host and he invites guests. Well, that's brilliant. Less work for me, but more important than that, it means it strengthens the relationships with the guests that you invite. So we've had PR experts, digital marketing person, we've even had a chairman of a football club Now, there has to be a connection, I should say, with professional services and business development. But if you listen to that, you'll see that there is a connection with both of those things, because the chairman of the football club has a relationship with a corporate litigation boutique firm in London. So you're strengthening the relationships, you're creating more goodwill, and more important than any of that, in terms of why you're doing this stuff to influence your target market, they're getting a better experience. Oops, sorry about that. They're getting a better experience. So hopefully some of you have sold podcasts too. Let's move on. Third and final area this morning, LinkedIn. Now, in your respective firms, there will be, hopefully, certainly some people, perhaps a small number of fee earners, who are evangelical about LinkedIn, who will wax lyrical about how it's generated opportunities for them. However, I also recognise at the other end of the spectrum, you will have a number of fee earners who take the view, complete waste of time, it's for recruitment consultants to irritate me. Yeah, it's a little bit of that goes on LinkedIn too. But if it's working for some and not others, it's got to be the strategy that's working. It's got the flaw has to be in the execution. So what is it that the people are getting value from LinkedIn are doing that the others aren't? I'm going to highlight a few areas in the limited time we've got this morning. These are things you can do immediately after this webinar, and they're really easy. They don't require much time or effort, frankly. First one is refresh your profile. Now is the time to actually look objectively, or even better, get someone else to have a look at your LinkedIn profile who can look at it objectively, and ask yourself, does it really showcase you in the best light? Does it really highlight your niche interests, the specialisms? LinkedIn, indeed social media, indeed online, works best around niches. So what do I mean by niches? Well, let's stick with employment law as a for instance, because it's an easy one. You might be an employment lawyer, but rather than just talk about employment law, flag whistleblowing, discrimination. Let's imagine you're a family lawyer. Rather than just say, family lawyer, deal with divorces, flag your particular interest in, is it children? Is it finance? Is it international? Have you got experience with surrogacy? The more niche, the better. You might be a private client solicitor who's experienced. I know of one solicitor who deals with cases involving missing people. Well, that's pretty niche. But this solicitor has got a national profile. Well, I'm not going to say who it is because I'm not, but has a national profile, but operates from a relatively small firm in Yorkshire. So I've narrowed it a little bit. What else? Putting recruitment consultants to one side, probably the biggest objection I get to LinkedIn is, I don't have time. I am massively unsympathetic to people who give me that challenge. I tell you now, we've all got the same amount of time. We make choices how we spend that time. And actually it's nonsense, because you don't need to be spending more than a couple of minutes a day on LinkedIn. I do mean 2 minutes. So how could you use 2 minutes effectively on LinkedIn? I'm going to give you two very specific examples. I'm going to be totally transparent. And I am going to name names because it presents the organisations in a positive light. Both the examples I'm going to give you relate to content that they have produced, not me, during the last 3 or 4 weeks. This is about liking, sharing and commenting to help you. So, first example, Wilberforce Chambers are a barrister's set in London who very strong in chancery and commercial set. And they're an organisation that my business has worked with in the past. We've done 2 or 3 projects, but we haven't worked with them in the last, 12, maybe even be 18 months now. So for all the reasons I've explained already, I want to retain visibility with Wilberforce. So 3 weeks ago, I'm having a coffee break. I've got LinkedIn I've got a LinkedIn app on my phone, which I recommend to everybody. That will save you a load of time to start with. It doesn't need to eat into the sort of 9 to 5 at your desk. Just get the LinkedIn app. Even someone as technically incompetent as me can manage to get an app on my phone. It's not that difficult. And so I'm having a cup of coffee. I'm just scrolling through some LinkedIn content, and I see that Wilberforce have posted what I think is a very good video. 2 QCs have posted a video talking about a property matter. I looked at this and I thought, yes, hallelujah. Some barristers that get it. This is what you should be doing. This is what everybody should be doing. And it's cost them nothing but I don't know, a few minutes, it might have taken 30 minutes to put together. I don't know, we have to ask them. So I liked it, I shared it, I commented on it, and the result of that was a nice message back from Wilberforce thanking me for supporting their business. And let's be honest, what was my real motivation there? I wanted to promote myself and look good. Now, obviously, authenticity at all times, please. I liked and shared and commented because I thought it was good, but it has strengthened the connection with Wilberforce. Different scenario, a couple of weeks later, a firm of patent attorneys do a lot of work with intellectual property, firm in London, very different dynamic, new clients, just about sort of getting to know you stage. Two of the patent attorneys there have produced same format, the firm called Keltie, check it out, Keltie, Keltie. They've produced some content with two patent attorneys talking about a matter relating to artificial intelligence. Quite highbrow stuff, but what impressed me was the delivery was done in a very engaging way that made it very accessible, even for people like me to understand at one level what it was all about. And they use humour. Not belly laugh humour, but it was actually quite funny too. That's all you need to do. There's nothing unprofessional about using a bit of humour and a lighter touch in the way you communicate your messages. So both examples of good stuff that all I needed to do was like, share and comment. Having said all of that, yes, there is merit in you and your organisation creating your own content. And I think this works best on an individual basis, which doesn't mean to say that your firm shouldn't have its own LinkedIn account. Size Turner Booth has its own, we have I call it corporate, there's only 3 people in the organisation, but actually it doesn't get the same degree of traffic and engagement as the individual accounts that the directors, myself, and done. So I do think you need to create your own content, but again, bear in mind what I said earlier, just regurgitate, recycle what you've done. It doesn't all have to be fresh content. Support your colleagues. And actually what works best here is sound bites, short and snappy stuff. If you can support written content with a photograph, all the better, because photographs, for reasons I don't quite understand, but I don't need to, has a significantly positive impact on the amount of views that you'll get, like significant, more than you'd imagine possible. So if you can support with a photograph and make it better still, so you don't infringe on any IP issues, take your own photographs, carry around a smartphone, do what I do. When I'm out and about, I just take a snap at anything that looks vaguely interesting or different. And at some point down the line, I'll find a reason to use it. One more point about blogs, and there is this, I don't want this to be misunderstood. You don't need to just write about the law or business stuff. Now, there does need to be a balance here because this isn't Facebook, but there may be some of you listening this morning who are tagged by me on my Friday playlist. So once a week, highlight of my week is I produce a Spotify playlist. And, you know, whatever your views on that, and I recognise, one, a lot of people won't like the choices because it's a little bit alternative, so it won't appeal to everybody. And secondly, some people will think, oh, that doesn't sound very professional. Whatever your views are, here are the facts. I can predict with a high degree of accuracy that I will get 3,000 plus views of those playlists. Now, I wish I could say that about my marketing and BD posts, but regrettably, if I get 1,000, that's fantastic. So I'm getting 3 times, sometimes as many as 6 times more views for my music than I am for the marketing. Nothing sarcastic, please, from the boys at Kiss about the quality of my marketing advice. I'm sure it's not that, it's the quality of my music. You need to get the balance right, but actually the playlist works. And just to be very clear, I know that the people that are viewing are my target audience. They're managing partners of law firms and accountancy practices. They're decision makers in my target market. So, you know, begin with the end in mind. Okay, we're going to move over to questions and answers shortly, just in a few minutes. But just before we do that, I've got two things I kind of want to say before we switch. The first thing is this. One of the reasons I believe that many law firms struggle with BD, and it's kind of done in a bit of an ad hoc, haphazard, unstructured way, which means you don't get the results that you could be getting, isn't because there isn't the talent or there isn't the ideas, or it's not necessarily to do with strategy. It's to do with implementation. And more specifically, activity isn't measured. I am in a privileged position where I get to basically be paid to be nosy. So I spend an awful lot of time, not just in law firms, but in other organisations within the wider professional services, and indeed the clients of law firms when I'm doing research. And it strikes me that those organisations, those departments, those teams, even those individuals that make a better fist of BD, they all do, there's one thing that they do. They measure stuff. Now, this isn't rocket science, it's not complicated, but they understand the difference between financial results, profit, revenue, and inputs, which I would argue, the BD activity, those are true key performance indicators. Financial measures, I would argue, are not KPIs, the key result indicators are an output. So what I've got here to share with you is a very simple pro forma that takes some of the ideas I've shared with you this morning, and it provides a framework, a pro forma, for you to adapt, because you might want to adapt it so it more fits your particular organisation. But just take away from it that what gets measured gets done. This is the point. If you make things transparent and you make people accountable and you break it down into bite-sized steps, stuff happens. Any of you that have any interest in sport whatsoever, I can't think of a sport this isn't applicable to, either individual sports or team sports, will know that, we've come a long, long way in the last 10 years or so. And at elite level, there is no sport that doesn't measure everything that moves, frankly. And people understand that what happens on the Saturday or Sunday afternoon on the football pitch or the rugby pitch or on the cycling track or the swimming pool isn't about the race or about that match. It's about what's happened before that and the build-up. It's about the preparation. It's about the training. It's about nutrition and sports science and all that good stuff. Those of you that you run probably have got an app. Exactly the same reason. So why is BD any different? Okay. Final thoughts just before, and please do, if you haven't already posted some questions, please do make them as challenging as you like. That's often a lot of the value of these webinars is in the questions rather than what people like me have said in the previous half hour. But just while you're doing that, one final thought. If you can think back to 21st of March, the weekend when the enormity of this pandemic hit us, if you think back to how you felt at that point in time, it was probably not a great place. It was probably quite a lot of quite negative or difficult thoughts and emotions that you were going through. And I'm not going to pretend it was any different for me. It's a tough time, and we found a lot of projects that we had planned, things just stopped. My business partner, Doug McPherson, over the course of that weekend, rather than feel particularly sorry for himself or have his head in his hands, he spent the weekend making a website called How to Do Business Development from Home, which I think is quite commendable. I could probably use a stronger word than that. In the 10, 11 weeks since, we've populated that with a lot more content that gets into a level of detail that I can't share with you in 30 minutes this morning. Please do use that resource. It's there to be used, and there's some good stuff on there, if I say so myself. And why do I bring that to your attention? One, because they're resources that you can get some benefit from. But the other reason is to say, look, shit happens. Control the controllables. When things happen, you've got to dig deep and you've got to find a way to adapt and actually get through it. And that's relevant to all of us. So I hope you find some of that useful. I'm going to sign off the formal bit now. So thank you for your attention this morning. You know where to find me, either directly or via the guys at LPM. I thank you to LPM and thank you to Quiss, who've been fantastic, and they've made this happen. So thank you, Dave, and thank you, Nick. I'm going to stop sharing now and pass over to Kayli. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bernard. That was amazing. As he mentioned, if anyone has any questions, we'll open up now. You can either post that in the chat, or please, if your technology allows it, do feel free to unmute yourselves and we'll have a bit of conversation. While people think of their questions, I'll start us off. I wanted to bring up something you said about staff taking on personal responsibility over their BD. I want to know what your thoughts are on, particularly for an SME law firm, whether they should have someone in a full BD role because of the multi-hat problem that often occurs with fee earners doing the law and like doing management, IT. What's your advice for that?
Okay, excuse me. Two things I would say. The first thing I would say is that, unfortunately, one of the reasons that there's often some difficulties around, over and above what I've said already, there's a big misunderstanding about BD, which is that business development it's just about extrovert people who like, schmoozing people at events. And that rules out an awful lot of people within the legal sector who don't fit that profile. But it's absolute nonsense. Some of the best, most successful salespeople I've ever met in my career, whether it's in law firms or outside, are actually introverts, because introverts, unlike extroverts, tend to be better at listening, tend to be more analytical, and so actually are quite predisposed to be very good at BD. So I think the first thing to be clear about is that there's real merit in doing other stuff, like creating content. Now, anybody who's met Doug will know, my business partner will know, he's a very different personality to me. Our overall principles, our ethos, the messages are exactly the same, but how we do BD differs significantly. And that's what you want in any organization. You want different talents, different strengths. So the first thing to say is, it's not all about, talking to people and meeting new people. It's about, the value of content, the value of social media, the value of speaking engagements, whether it's any of the formats I've used. That's the first thing. It's about matching activity to personality. Second point is, and again, it may be some people who disagree with what I'm going to say next. I personally, you've asked me a direct question, so I'll give you a direct answer. I personally don't think the right decision for SMEs, SME law firms, is to hire specific BD people who are given ownership for winning and attracting new business. That's just my view. Why do I say that? At the end of the day, the people that instruct solicitors, they want a relationship. They want to know the person that's actually doing the work. And to me, it just doesn't sit comfortably for me that you've got a salesperson who brings it in and then they just pass it over to someone else. I don't think that's the best way to do it. I think it's about I believe everybody can contribute to BD, even people that think it's not for them. They don't realise they perhaps that there are other ways that they can win work other than just having to talk to strangers, which probably is the toughest thing for the majority of people. So I don't think that strategy is the best one. Ultimately, I think it's about fitting activity to different people, and then there has to be the culture in the firm to support BD, which means I think that in some cases, and this would be applicable to some people this morning, not everyone. I think sometimes billable hours should reflect that, and there are law firms that have reduced the number of billable hours, those that have targets, to a manageable level to allow more BD time. Equally, in some firms, you might think this is less possible within an SME law firm, but I know SME law firms that do this, where the managing partner doesn't practice anymore. It's just responsible for building the business. Ultimately, in any business, whether it's an SME law firm or any other type of SME, you have to be able to work on the business as well as in the business. If you just expect the phone to ring, I'm sorry, that's a very high risk strategy. It was before this pandemic. It certainly is afterwards. So I'm hoping that goes some way towards answering your question, Kayli.
No, it does indeed. We also have someone in the audience asked a question. She asks, what do you suggest to do differently, if at all, from what you have described in the webinar for those considering to starting up their own company at this time? So I guess BD from the ground up, what does that look like?
Wow. What I'm going to say now, I would have said before, but it's probably tougher now, but I still think it's the right thing to do. I think when people are starting up a business, whatever business that is, whether that's within the legal sector or outside, there is a tendency for very good reason to take whatever's out there because you just want to get business. I think that's the wrong strategy. I think if you try and be all things to all people, even if in the short term, even if in the short term that brings some quick wins, I think that can be damaging to your business. I think you have to have the courage, the confidence and the courage to be very single-minded, very focused about exactly what your offer is. Now, we practice that in our own business. We're a small business, and particularly at the moment where it is tougher, frankly. So there is, people are looking after the cash for reasons I understand, but they still have to build their practices, so they're going to be probably more considered, and ultimately the budget might be smaller. But if you can demonstrate that you add value and that your offer matches the needs of that organization, there's still opportunities out there. And I think too often when we see the news, we look at the headlines and it's all doom and gloom. So you take the retail sector, doom and gloom, all reads. When you get into the detail, it's not quite like that. There are success stories, and I think it's largely about focus and having courage in your conviction and being very single-minded in your pursuit. And one final thing I would say, and again, there's a parallel here with the retail sector. Retailers, when they look at their business, one of the things they talk about a lot in terms of their own key performance indicators is market share. What I think is interesting with the legal sector is that no one talks about market share. But if you were to look at market share, even the biggest names in the legal sector, so I don't know, I'm just making this up, let's say DLA Piper. If you looked at DLA Piper and you said, well, what share have they got of real estate? Forget about just focus on the UK, let's keep it simple. Now, I don't know what the number is, but I'm prepared to bet you now it's less than 3%. I bet it's less than 2%, and they're a massive law firm. So even if the real estate market halves in the next 12 months, if their strategy is to move from, 1.7% of that market to 2.0% of that market, they're going to grow their business. It's a mindset thing. And I think mindset is absolutely critical. And I don't want to come across as too Alan Sugar-esque here, but there weren't many people who said to me it was a good idea in the early days of my business, when I started specialising with intellectual property. In fact, nobody had anything positive to say. They all said, it's a bit niche, there aren't many of them. What patent attorneys? Yeah, but if you're the biggest in Europe, which I believe we are until someone can prove otherwise, it doesn't really matter. And when you are a big fish in a small pond in a niche market, you can charge more as well. If you try and be a generalist, you're commoditizing what you do. There'll always be somebody who can sell it cheaper. So to summarize that answer, 1, be focused. 2, have courage in your conviction. 3, don't undersell yourself. Don't follow the race to the bottom. Stick to your guns. You start giving stuff away, discounting, you'll never get back.
Mm-hmm. Great advice. If anyone wants to ask more questions, feel free to unmute now. Otherwise, I'll continue with the Q&A. Great. I've got another question then. A bit of a different one for you. So we've just been at LPM, we've been doing some investigation about certain practice areas and how they work, and some lessons to be learned. So from your experience, do you think there's any particular practice area that does BD well, and what can you learn from that?
That's a tough one, because I'm in a bit of a no-win situation here, because if I say, I'm going to give you an answer, I'm just joking, but of course I'm probably going to cause offence for some people now in that particular area, but you've asked me a direct question, and I'm not going to sit on the fence. I'll give you a direct answer. This is all relative, what I'm going to say. I think that, and again, it's dangerous to generalise, so these are my disclaimers, but I'm going to attempt to answer it. Employment law, I would say, you tend to find in employment law that, whether it's because it's the sort of people that are attracted because they're more people I don't know, or whether it's because there's a change in employment law, which means they're probably more likely to be involved in more events and there's more things to talk about, because a lot of the things that employment lawyers get involved with are quite topical, like paternity leave, or, well, all the issues. I think they tend to be, if I had to pick them, they'd be near the top. I think sometimes there's a tendency for private client solicitors, and I say private client in the broader sense, I include family, trust, wills, estate, private, the whole gamut of individual services. I think sometimes there's a tendency for for solicitors in that area to take the view, oh, this isn't really for us because our work is a very different marketing approach to it is on the business services. I don't buy that, don't buy it at all. For so many reasons we don't really have time to get into now, but I just don't subscribe to that view. I see no reason at all why the things we've been talking about don't have equal applicability on private services. It may be that you substitute the word client for referrer in some cases. Corporate, I would say, it's a really difficult one, but I've given you, if I had to pick top of the class, if I had to, and I'll probably upset majority of people tuning in this morning, I'd probably pick employment law. Having said that, names which remain nameless, I can think of some pretty poor employment from a marketing perspective in that area.
No, thanks for answering. We have another question. Do you have any key tips to creating intimacy in relationship building for BD with clients while we're using online tools and everyone is remote? How do you do intimacy online?
Just read that again, please.
How can we build up intimacy while using online tools?
Okay. It's tougher, but some of the principles are exactly the same. If you think about any relationship, over and above what I've shared already this morning, I think a lot of it is about continuity. It's about the number of touch points, and that's every bit as relevant online as it is in real time. You know, in real time, that if you don't see a friend for a long period of time, it's a little bit awkward on that initial, because you haven't seen them for a long time, and you just feel a bit stilted. It's the same online. So I think there needs to be, people need to do more than they probably feel comfortable with online. And I know, because I've heard it, many people say this to me, that they feel, oh no, there's Zoom fatigue, and oh, that some people just create too much noise and it's irritating. Again, take a step back. It's all about results. And what you may see as irritating or perceive as creating noise because people are doing too much stuff, it works. That's the bottom line. It works. And there's lots of, academic research, if you want to go down that route, that says the same thing. You do need to frankly create a lot of noise. You do need a lot of repetition. You do need to use all the channels. So whether it's online or offline, you need to do more. That's the bottom line. Now, clearly it should be good stuff. There's no point just putting rubbish out there. But again, if I was going to be very frank, I think sometimes there's a tendency in the legal sector for people to, because the nature of law, people tend to be quite risk averse. People are overly cautious and hold back and think, and probably perfectionists as well. Now is not the time to, I think, be a perfectionist or be overly cautious. You've got to get your messages out there, whether it's online or, well, it's going to be online at the moment, isn't it? For fairly obvious reasons.
Yeah. Great. I think we have time for one more question. If that doesn't come from the audience, then I've got one more for you. All right. To end us off, I guess, I want your view on whether you think law firms understand the link between BD and marketing. Your second point, all around content. And
in one word, no. So let me be more helpful than that. In fairness, I think the direct answer is no, I don't think they do. But let me be a little bit more considered in my answer. There are some blurs. I think if you did a Venn diagram, I think there'll be an area in the middle and there'll be some overlap. But let me give you my view for what it's worth, the difference. I think marketing is about infrastructure. It's about foundations. It's about the platforms on which you present yourself to the world. Some of this is quite intangible stuff. It's the branding piece. It's also about some more concrete things like websites, publications. I would see marketing as the necessary noise to create a platform to enable fee earners to actually sell effectively. And that's the BD bit for me. If the marketing is strong, then the responsibility for BD, which I believe is about fee earners, not about an in-house department, their job should be easier, because when you go out and communicate with people, one, they've heard of you already, two, your firm's got a good reputation, and thirdly, people kind of understand or think they understand what you're about. And then it's about the strength of the actual relationship and your ability to deliver in a way that's congruent with the brand values and principles that hopefully the marketing department have got sorted. So, it ain't rocket science. There is overlap, but that's the distinction I would make. And I don't think personally that, going back to the earlier question, I don't think BD is something you can outsource. You can outsource support, you can outsource elements, and obviously I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think organizations should, because frankly, they're going to get a better return for their buck. But, I would say that. But that's how I see the difference.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Bernard. If anyone has any final questions, speak now. or if you think of questions later, feel free to email us and we'll pass them on to Bernard to answer. Thank you so much. I think that was very helpful. Some nuggets there for everyone. Also a big thank you to KISS, of course, for supporting this webinar. It's much appreciated. I guess that's it from us. We'll have a recording up online, which will circulate after this. And everyone have a great day.
Brilliant. And yeah, likewise, thank you very much for taking the time and trouble to dial in. It's appreciated.
Thank you so much, Brendan.
Have a good one. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.